Beyond the Fence Line, a podcast brought to you by the Texas Agricultural Land Trust. Created by landowners for landowners, we're proud to play a role in conserving the Texas legacy of wide open spaces.
Welcome back, listeners, to Beyond the Fence Line, a podcast brought to you by Texas Agricultural Land Trust. Whether you're a landowner, a wildlife enthusiast, conservation professional, or just curious about the future of working lands, you're in the right place. I'm Chad Ellis, the CEO of TALT, and glad you're here. Today, I'm joined by my good friend and renowned conservationist, Andy Sansom. Andy is a prominent Texas conservationist and former executive director of Texas Parks and Wildlife, where he helped protect hundreds of thousands of acres of wildland and modernized the agency. He later founded and led the Meadows Center for Water and Environment at Texas State University, and becoming a key voice on water, rivers, and outdoor education. As I kind of look by Andy here next to me, I see this book about Theodore Roosevelt. And then I really kind of look at it, right, Andy is our Texas Teddy Roosevelt of conserving over 500,000 plus acres across the state for all Texans to enjoy and to prosper from those benefits of those lands. And Andy also has a book series with Texas A&M Press and has invited TALT to be a part of an upcoming book about the art of private land stewardship. And we're going to talk about the book. We're going to talk about, I think, markets, water, conservation, fly fishing, right? And really about the public benefits of private land stewardship today, and the value it has of the broader community for all Texans. So, Andy, thank you for being here today, and I'm looking forward to a conversation with you.
Thank you, Chad. Thank you so much. And understand that I am very, very grateful for all that you all do. As I have said before, I believe that TALT is a transformational organization which opened up a whole new world for working lands across the state. As you mentioned, I spent a good part of my life, particularly in the 80s, acquiring land for state parks and wildlife refuges and the like. But the lesson that I learned in doing all of that is that we cannot buy enough land to preserve all our wildlife habitat or watersheds. So we have to work with private landowners to keep them on the land and encourage them to do the right thing. And that's what you're doing. And that's without question the Lord's work.
Yeah. I think, Andy, when we kind of look at it, every land and every acre across the state also has a family and a land steward that takes care of that. And that being a biologist, a state park ranger, or a rancher or farmer, or a wildlife enthusiast that's taking care of that land. And I think it's important of all of our work is how do we empower those land stewards to help take better care of that land and help them be able to, help their families, their heritage, the legacy, and more importantly, to help them provide those benefits for all Texans.
Well, we lose here in Texas rural and agricultural land faster than any other state. And in my mind, the biggest terrestrial environmental problem that we have in Texas is the continued fragmentation of family land. And so whatever we can do to keep families on the land and being good stewards benefits everyone.
Yeah, the numbers are astonishing, right? We're losing 1,023 acres a day, what I say, to the last crop of concrete.
Wow. The other thing that I think is part of our mission as conservationists is to get people in growing, booming urban areas of Texas to understand that they receive benefits from privately owned land that is well managed and protected.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things that, we strive, at TALT, is that we have to talk about beyond the acres of what we can serve and those families. We have to talk about really what the benefits, and every acre is providing benefits. And so, some of those, numbers and outcomes that we kind of calculate is one is water, because we
Right.
try to, calculate that to the public. And I'm happy to say we're knocking on the door to 100 families that we've worked with.
Wow.
And helped empower that legacy. Those little under 100 families on a daily basis of blood, sweat, and tears, Andy, that they're doing of that land stewardship. They're providing around 600 billion water bottles in 1 year
Wow.
of that conservation. So just trying to be able to, connect that. And it's hard to, we're just so far disconnected from the land.
Yeah, there's no question about that. Particularly where water's concerned. One of the things that um, I'm so pleased that the state and the people of the state have committed large expenditures for water infrastructure, but at the same time, I'm very disappointed that the natural infrastructure has not been included in that. Our state leaders somehow don't they think the whole issue is around pipes or
Right.
wastewater treatment plants, when in fact the most critical infrastructure, both in terms of our watersheds and our aquifer recharge areas, are on private lands.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That resonates to me, and I think about Lyndon B. Johnson's, quote of soil and water conservation starts where that first raindrop falls. And that's the stewardship of looking outside, your windows here at the Hershey Ranch, and the stewardship here. And how do we start, connecting those dots? I think is very key. And I think that's where it's key too of our conservation community to speak a little bit more and be able to, from our policymakers to our, communities as a whole.
That's one of the reasons why I'm so excited that you guys have taken on this new book on
Right.
the art of working lands, because I think that will give us yet another opportunity to spread the word beyond the fence lines
Yeah, I
in a
mean,
very, very beautiful way.
yeah. You want to maybe tell the listeners a little bit more detail of kind of the structure of the book and what we're doing.
Well, we have recruited a, a fairly significant list of contemporary Texas regional artists, all of whom are very well known for painting the landscape. And we've secured the cooperation of ranchers throughout the state, people who live on working lands, to allow these artists to come in and paint their lands so that we can create a book which, number one, features all of those paintings, but number two, tells the story that we're trying to get across. At the same time, we can, when the book is out, create a series of exhibitions across the state, which not only will attract a lot of attention, but will allow people in urban areas to understand what TALT is doing and the importance of working lands.
Yeah, I'm excited. I think being able, to have these artists paint the pictures of the landscape and the stewardship that's happening, but more importantly, it's the writing and in the storytelling of those families and the work that they do. And I think more importantly, I'm loving the idea. And I will give you this, and one of your greatest traits is persistence. You've called me multiple times, like, Chad, I think we need to do this, and I'm like, I'm not an artist, and it's kind of like, well, how do we do this? And it finally, like, yes, we're going to do this, Andy, and I'm extremely excited about it. And I think the part that I'm not excited is about this connectivity and that side.
Well, there's a long, long history of art and conservation. When Abraham Lincoln set aside Yosemite, or the United States began to work to set aside Yellowstone. People in the East had no idea, but they engaged prominent artists of the day to paint those places so that people back east could understand the beauty of it and why they were being protected. And in fact, if you go around Washington today, you'll often see paintings from the middle of the 19th century of places like Yellowstone and Yosemite, which contributed to their protection.
Yeah, I think on the flip side too, right? If we think about that, Andy, as we think about our forefathers and what brought them to this country, and kind of the grounding foundation was agriculture and stewarding that land. One of the greatest things, I was in Washington D.C. Just a few weeks ago, and had a rancher with me, which is actually one that will the Clay Miller with the Miller family out there, and Valentine, and Clay was with me, and I said, Clay, there's one place that I got to take you here, and that's the Library of Congress. It's just one of those buildings that I just love going in and seeing that. And I went and took them to George Washington's crop records.
Wow.
And you can sit there and see our first president, and how the detail of his crop rotation, and when he planted, when he harvested, and all of that. And so I mean that's our roots of our country. And it's kind of interesting to hear about, and I hadn't thought about the art side of it, as you mentioned, of this. We're really reconnecting what our forefathers had in mind.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, Andy, I would love to, one of the things too, and is this connection of, the art, the book, and this connection of private land stewardship, public benefit. And I think one of those is, I think, some things that you've, have thought through over the years, and I'd love to kind of pick your brain. And it's an area of TALT, what we call our additive conservation, of really free market approaches to conservation. And really, a lot of those free markets is really tying back to the public. And I know you've had a lot of thoughts, and have pioneered, and had your fingerprints on like water markets and what that looks like. And I just like to talk about other ecosystem services and markets, and how do we move that forward in the future, as another connectivity.
Well, it's interesting, and back to just for a moment to the history. One of the things that people don't understand is that the landscape in Texas, which is almost entirely owned by private citizens, is in better condition today than it was at the turn of the 20th century.
Uh-huh.
The landscape in Texas, at the end of the 1900s was overgrazed. We'd lost most of our timber. And today, quite honestly, it's in pretty darn good shape. And it's because of the stewardship of private landowners who've cared about the land.
Yeah.
You mentioned water. I think one of the challenges we face, and hopefully we'll be able to maybe make some progress on it during this upcoming legislative session, is that how do we make sure that we provide enough water for a continuously growing population, while at the same time protecting private landowners who basically live and manage above most of the water that we're
Right.
going to be going after.
Right.
And I think the protection of rural landowners in the face of proposals to move large volumes of water is probably going to be the next biggest challenge that we have to face.
Yeah. No, it's a challenge for us, I think. Um, when we think about, we think about this, and I think this is a challenge, is we think about this responsibility on these private landowners, right? And they take that, and they have this land ethic within them to take care and steward that land. And I think we have, it comes back to this disconnection, I think, of all the benefits that come from that stewardship and from that land. We think about the food, the fiber, water, but there's so many other ecosystem services that we just sort of glance over. Flood retention, carbon sequestration, wildlife habitat, open space, uh, you know, spiritual and mental health,
Right.
right, is huge. I mean, we saw that during the pandemic where people started getting closer connected to the land and nature itself, and without those stewards. But I come back and think about, for centuries, um, these land stewards have only gotten paid for the ag commodity,
Right.
right? Not, some of these other benefits.
Right.
And, we need to, I think with this growing population, 1,400 people moving to the state daily. We have to be innovative. We have to, I feel like we're behind the eight ball and we're being reactive.
Well, there's no question that one of the opportunities, and in fact, probably urgent need, is to find a way to reward or compensate good land stewards beyond just what they're selling as commodities for in exchange for protecting those areas that provide the ecological services. There's no question about that. I will tell you that in Bear County, where you guys are headquartered, and in Travis County, and increasingly now in Hayes County, and hopefully soon in Comal County, there's been more money spent on protecting aquifer recharge areas and watersheds with private landowners on the property than the entire rest of the state combined. And so it is, there have been local entities that have shown that investment in aquifer protection through the purchase of conservation easements or market transactions with landowners can, in fact, cause that natural infrastructure to be protected so the water continues to flow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think, Aldo Leopold in his, 1937 economics paper basically said, conservation ultimately boils down to rewarding those private land stewards that's protecting those public benefits.
You should correct me if I'm wrong, but my perception is that the two of the things that have caused an increasing use of conservation easements to protect private lands have been, one, the formation of TALT, which allowed landowners to see peers managing an organization for the protection of private lands and thus trust it. But the other thing was the introduction, primarily by NRCS, of actually providing cash to private landowners who are willing to put conservation easements on their land.
Yeah, USDA, Natural Resource Conservation Service, is a huge partner and a huge help, especially when we look at the last 5 years.
We could not have done what we've done out here on this ranch without the NRCS.
Yeah, absolutely. That private public benefits and coming together like that, it really helps, right? Those incentives help matter and helps us move faster into that conservation. I'm very fortunate, and I think one of the things I want to highlight, Andy, that is even more exciting today is Chief Betancourt and Associate Chief Buckley with NRCS. Their number one priority for the NRCS nationwide, their number one is conservation easements.
Wow.
This is the first time in history that our chief and our leadership of NRCS has said, they understand this nexus that we're having and the amount of acres that we're losing on a daily basis. And we think about our national security is that we have to keep those stewards on the land, taking and providing, for their families as all of our families. Right. And so it's very exciting times.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that. And from what I perceive, from on a day-to-day basis here, their programs and funding is holding up.
It is. Yes, sir.
Which is cool.
It is. Yeah. I mean, and I think too, when we think about it, it's also the aspect of, I want to talk about maybe too is the connection of our other private foundations, right? They play a huge role and they've stepped up as much in this time period, especially in this last 5 years of investing in these land stewards and investing in these lands. And what's great is that we can work with these landowners in the NRCS easement program. NRCS will only pay 50% of that conservation value. And as we know, it doesn't pay for due diligence cost and things like that. And it's a real estate transaction, and there's cost to it, just like buying a home or anything of that nature. And so these other foundations of, Hershey and Stillwater, Mitchell, Meadows, all of our foundations, are stepping up and helping. And to me, that's what excites me.
Yeah.
Is that we have land stewards, we have private, we have public, and we're all working together.
I'm so glad that you mentioned the philanthropic community, because that is in fact true. And the exciting part about it is that I know I serve on the board of a foundation, and we each year probably fund several due diligence projects
Yes.
for landowners that are needing to do title work and pay lawyers and all of those things to prepare for the use of a conservation easement, and that's vital. And the other thing that I've seen, which is more and more of, which I think is also cool, is that foundations have begun to actually loan money as a way of I guess what I call it is a program related investment, where they actually get a little return, but they may have made a huge conservation easement project possible.
Yeah.
The Way Foundation, which is in Hays County in Houston, is doing more and more of that, and Hershey is beginning to look at it as well.
Yeah, it's one of my key goals this year, Andy, is for TALT to develop a revolving fund that we can help our landowners and have that and as well. I mean, I think we have
Sort of like the private equity for conservation.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the thing, is that we have to be innovative, and we have to look at more tools in the toolbox. And as much as NRCS has helped in our philanthropic community, we still have to, it's still not going to reach the need that we have. So yeah.
No, I can't agree with you more. It's very, very exciting. Back in the 1980s, early 80s, I worked for the Nature Conservancy, and I remember going to the offices in Washington, and on the door was what at that time was our slogan, which was land conservation through private action. And we need to bring that thought back.
Oh, absolutely. One of the innovative things that I'm working on right now, Andy, and I don't know if we've even visited about this, but I'm starting to work on a couple of things. One of them is thinking about, other new ways of funding conservation. And one of them is I'm looking at and working on a federal transferable tax credit. So think about from a conservation easement aspect on that donated easement, we could take that donated value and basically, turn it into a credit and have a federal ability. So it'd be another mechanism.
It's a great idea.
And then also, I think even we still need something more than that. And so I'm starting to work on a state transferable tax credit as well.
Wow.
And so I think those are the things that we have to, and those are going to, it's not going to happen overnight. But we're making definitely headway. And I think with this administration, especially on the federal tax credit, I think of this administration, innovations that are going to come out of it are going to be around taxes and things of that nature. So I think we're definitely getting some steam behind us and showing and having these conversations of that investment from a national, and what it means from a national security and economic stability in these rural communities.
Well, once again, that kind of leads me back to water, because I think that when you look at, I know I've seen several studies over the years that indicate that community bond issues throughout the country for land protection are almost always successful based on the protection of water resources.
Right.
And so I think that if linking the um, protection of working lands to the sustainability of our water resources is going to be one of the keys to that, finding those innovative market transactions that make it work.
Yeah. Yeah, we're starting. I'm excited right now. Andy James, who's our director of additive conservation for TALT, we're starting to work with some some areas and some other groups, and really starting to build sort of a 10-year agreement around water. And we have some major corporations on buyers, and I'm very excited. I mean, we're talking real money from a stewardship side. I mean, anywhere from $100 to $300 an acre per year for over 10 years.
Wow.
Which, when we think about that investment back into that,
Where do I sign up?
We'll talk. We'll talk. Yeah. So we're like right on the cusp, and I think we'll maybe have our first agreement closed in probably the next 60, 90 days.
That's wonderful.
And you think about that, it's like, and to me, it's like all those ecosystem services, and so let's say we help this land steward with the water, how can we stack a carbon contract on top of that and make another $30-$40, and start, that's what we have to do. And then look at, like, how do we go and work with NRCS and get some dollars more there, and really look at it from a transformational aspect of stewardship across.
The other thing that you mentioned earlier that really resonates with me, and that we do not want to ever forget, is the sort of spiritual or mental health um, payout of well protected working lands. We have we do most of our whitetail deer management out here with youth, with young people that come from as far away as El Paso and Texarkana, and the most important thing, it seems to me, that we can do, and it's not solely the province of government, but also private landowners, is introduce children to the outdoors, whether it's hunting or fishing or whatever, bird watching, because they're going to be responsible for it. And I every day I look at letters that I've received from children that have come out here, and it's just moving to think that one of these days they're going to be in a position to make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I would challenge our private landowners across is, a lot of times we want to keep the gate closed and it's easier, but I think we're at a time where the more we can open our gates in situations like that, to help share our story and the importance, especially for our youth and our future,
Right.
is so valuable, and it's worth the time and effort that it takes for that. Yeah, what a blessing. Well, what else? What else you have? You have questions for me, or we don't get this opportunity?
What are your biggest challenges right now?
Our biggest challenges? Well, I think it's the same challenges that we have in Texas. What's amazing, Andy, is when I started at TALT, which is right at 6 years ago. Time flies.
Gosh.
When I came, we had probably around 6 or 8 projects in our pipeline. We're pushing 100, and the phones keep ringing every day.
Wow.
Right. And so that's amazing to me. It's just this
Yeah.
such an increase. But I think some of our challenges is this. I think we're starting to get to, our average age is closer to 70 years of age of our owners of our land. You start getting into that of, they're trying to make decisions, right? And what is that? And the conservation easement is one of those tools. And so I think that's, a lot of, our conversations. I think we have families too that don't have heirs.
Right.
Right. And they're trying to figure out, but they put blood, sweat, and tears of building, this beautiful ranch or farm and operation. And, it's like, what do they do?
Right.
So that's one of the things, Lee Owens on our staff at TALT is really trying to build this program and an option of land, and how can TALT be, a catalyst or a bridge for them. Maybe we can, receive that land, but more importantly, help and be creative and find the right steward to take over that land.
Right.
And think of a creative finance models and all of these things that I think it's going to take. Again, it's one of these other innovations that we have to be thinking about. And we're having more and more of those conversations, and I'm really excited about that. Because it's just, I mean, that's my love, right? Is helping people meet their wishes and keep that heritage and legacy together.
Right.
So that's one challenge, and I think the money side is always right, and especially as this demand is increasing. Um, and so, and that's, I kind of mentioned some of the innovations where we're working there. I would say our other side, back to private landowners again, is this development side of the business, or across the state. With that, we've seen this increase of data centers coming across, and what is that? How does that handle? With the data centers happen to be with high uh, power transmission lines. And then we start getting into eminent domain and these things of private property rights. And so we're starting to see these challenges of our private property rights of eminent domain that's happening. And so that's a big, one of those other areas on our topic of how do we work with this. I mean, we're pro development, in our state, but we can do these things in a smart way.
Right.
And that's where, smart policy, smart just actions together. And I think that's, all of us coming around the table to find those solutions.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I can tell you that since I've been living on a ranch, I've had two major confrontations over a condemnation.
Mm-hmm.
And if I had a wish, it would be that our legislators would at least provide some additional protection. There's no way that you can argue that eminent domain can be an important part of preparing for the future, but we should provide some additional protection for working lands that are permanently protected.
I agree. And that's one of our goals, right? When we think about those land stewards have chosen to put, their property in a conservation easement to keep it a working landscape forever.
I know that there are, for example, with the Public Utility Commission, they do have to consider the environment in making eminent domain decisions, but easements so far are not part of that, and they should be, because that's how the environment is being protected.
Yeah, and those are some of the pieces that Dr. Roel Lopez and I've worked on, is trying to find the value of ecosystem services, right? And so we've done that. We're in conversations just last week. Roel and I were talking about that. Those numbers are already old, right? We need to update, and it's funny how quick data.
Well, I'm so glad you're working with Roel, because he's a hero of mine.
Yeah.
He has brought so much to this whole effort over the past couple of decades, and I'm very grateful to him.
Well, let's not get his head too big. It's already big enough, Andy.
Right.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I mean, I've had the pleasure of working with Roel for 20 years, and his mindsets and willingness to roll up his sleeves to help, and he understands the big picture, and which is great, which is really about private land stewardship, and it's exciting. One of the other kind of items that I've kind of dove into, and it kind of brings up with Roel and I. This is probably about 12 years ago. We're sitting around and having this same conversation, Andy, and we were kind of seeing the challenges that we were facing, and we kind of basically said, look, we're missing this connective, this kind of other organization to sort of be this hub of information, of convening, smart policy, informations, free market approaches, innovation, etc. And so we started what we called the Texas Center for Private Land Stewardship.
Right.
Right. And we started that. And for multiple reasons, it kind of just didn't get its feet underneath it. And I think of it, we were just ahead of our time. We would go to folks and talk about what we're talking today, but we were talking about like, hey, this is going to happen in the future. And people just weren't, attuned to really. And then now all of a sudden we fast forward to today, and it's frankly, the oh shit moment, right?
Yeah.
And so we've basically have the last year, back with the help of our philanthropic community, has stepped up and helped us, and we just stood up Texas Center for private lands, and it's going to be this kind of think tank and convener, and I'm excited about that.
You should be. Congratulations.
Yeah. So I think that's going to be another key piece to helping us, move forward.
Absolutely.
So we think about Property Environment Research Center, PERC, out of Bozeman. It's definitely kind of that model, but just Texas and private land focused with this. So, well, I know Romy Swanson's got to be listening to us, and I know he's got a question for you. I know it's his question. It's really my question, but I'm just kind of throwing him under the bus. Now let's think about Lake City, Colorado, and beautiful Lake City and the streams, and again, just this aspect of nature. What is your favorite dry fly that you recommend using on the Lake Fork of the Gunnison or Henson Creek?
Elk hair caddis.
Elk hair caddis, that's a good one. Yeah.
One of the things that is really, really a source of happiness in my life is that both of my grandchildren are fly anglers. And I had the opportunity last summer on the Lake Fork to take my son and my granddaughter and my grandson all fishing together. The guide said this is the first time we've had 3 generations in the same party. And my granddaughter, who was 14 at the time, caught the most and the largest fish.
That's great. I mean, that's what it's about, right? And I think that story, it doesn't matter if that's, on a fly stream in Colorado or, on the Guadalupe here in Texas or, anywhere. It's about family, and it's about people. It's about the relationship to the people, and it's also about the relationship to the land.
We had a project out here this is over the last couple of years with Parks and Wildlife, in which we've trapped and banded and taken blood samples from Rio Grande wild turkeys. And I somehow or another, my fishing guide in Lake City learned of that, and so he said, "Hey, can you get me some turkey feathers?" And this year, I happened to find the turkeys that apparently had been killed by a coyote. And all the feathers were spread out all over the pasture. So I grabbed it all up and put it in a Ziploc and shipped to Lake City. So I'm hoping this summer to fish with one of my turkey.
That would be fun. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, fly fishing is definitely a love and passion in Lake City. I when I was 16, I was a fly fishing guide and ran a shop there in Lake City.
Really?
And the Sportsman. And so I started doing that when I was 16. I worked for Hank Roberts, who, in my mind,
I had no idea.
Yeah. So my mind, Hank is like the godfather of fly fishing, and worked for him. And at the time when I graduated high school, when I was 18, and at that time Hank was in his 90s, and he offered me to take over his business. And he had a place in Guatemala, and his work, in New Mexico and Colorado. And I sit there and I it's probably the only one of the regrets I have of not taking on that. But I was 18, and at that time, trying to make a living and fly fishing was pretty tough. It's not like what it is today. And
Well, you may be aware that the Sportsman is now owned by one of the guys.
that's awesome.
Yeah, that they basically his name is Peter Breeden, and he would normally migrate between Broken Bow, Oklahoma, where he'd fish in the winter, and then Lake City in the summer. And he ended up buying the Sportsman, and it's booming. It's doing really
That's
well.
awesome. I got to go back. So we got to have the second part of this maybe this summer on fishing in Lake City and
Well, I got a cabin reserved for you if you want to come up and fish.
I'm all in. I'm all in.
Let me tell you the most recent moving story about Lake City. I have a friend that lives up there. She bought a house up there, and she came home to Houston for a while, and her sister drove her back. And her sister, for some reason, had never been there. Well, they reached the divide above Lake City at the height of the Aspens. And she said when her sister looked out and saw the mountains in late September that she wept.
Yep. I mean, it just, again, is that another example of God's creation and the mental and spiritual side of it.
Yep.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, Andy, I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about this Hershey Ranch and everything here.
This Hershey Ranch was owned by Jake and Terry Hershey from Houston. Mrs. Hershey was a very, very strong advocate of conservation. She placed an easement on the ranch before she passed away, and it is now the largest piece of protected land, either public or private, in Gillespie County. We manage it for wildlife. We do have cattle on the ranch, and they are managed in a regenerative process using electric fences to essentially mimic how bison would have treated the land. We also manage it for white-tailed deer, which primarily is making sure that we harvest a certain number each year, and all that is done either by children who come out in youth hunts in partnership with Parks and Wildlife and the Texas Wildlife Association, but we also have hunts for adult women who have never hunted, and that started for women who work in conservation organizations but have never hunted. And the guides are all women, the butcher's a woman, it's all run by women. And so, quite honestly, in my life, seeing these kids get fired up about the outdoors, seeing these women relate to each other and bond out here in a moving outdoor experience is probably the greatest privilege and source of satisfaction in my life at this point.
Yeah, that's amazing. I guess on that, what are some of your, I would say, greatest joys or accomplishments beyond that and your passion and of your career?
Well, I've just been really lucky. One of the projects that I worked on for many years was the Big Bend Ranch State Park, and I first heard about it in Washington D. When I lived in Washington and worked in the Interior Department, and Bob Armstrong, who was the land commissioner at that time, came to see me in my office, and he couldn't stop talking about this incredible place on the Rio Grande, in spite of the fact that it has almost 40 miles of Rio Grande frontage and two of the highest waterfalls in Texas. All he could talk about was the night sky. And I had the good fortune to work with Bob over the years, both in the Nature Conservancy and at Parks and Wildlife, to acquire the ranch. And while Bob was still living, we had the celebration of the 20th anniversary of the acquisition at the ranch. At that time, my grandson was 5 years old. He was living in the New York suburbs, and we brought him down. because it was such a big deal for our family. Well, he went back to New Jersey after after the celebration, and the teacher assigned the class to select an animal that migrates, tell where it would migrate to and why. And he picks an eagle, and he says that he would migrate to Texas so he could go out to Big Bend and see the stars.
Wow, that's amazing. One other, question that I love your insights on is really, what's your greatest hope for the future?
Well, I'm an optimist,
Mm-hmm.
and I believe that thanks to folks like you and so many others, things continue to get better, even though, we just seem to face almost insurmountable challenges, particularly in water. But one of the wonderful things about Texas is that we're an optimistic culture, and and there's people all over this state, all walks of life, all races and genders, that respond to the fact that some of us are working very hard to protect it for future generations.
Yeah, I think I agree, and I think where a lot of us are like your grandson,
Yeah,
right? And that's what makes, one of the things that makes this state so great.
absolutely.
Um, well, Andy, I just want to, thank you again for taking the time to chat today, and I always enjoy when we get to sit, and it's truly a pleasure and an honor. You've been such a blessing to so many people. And, I think of, the amount of people you've touched is
I got a lot of people fooled.
well, it's I think when you step back, and I don't even know if you've really kind of stepped back and thought about this, is you think about your hand in so many of these state parks and properties, and you talk about how many families have gone out there and had just memories and built memories, and that was due to you unlocking, and they may not know you personally, but you had a hand in their lives and memories, and so many. So just wanted to thank you for all you've done and all you will keep doing.
Well, I'm a blessed person and grateful to you for all that you did.
Well, thank you. Well, we're excited about the book,
So
and
am I.
yeah, and the art and the collaborators and telling the story of this, private land stewardship and public benefit. And I'm just looking forward to it. It's a highlight for me, and want to really thank you, our friends and listeners, for tuning in. And we look forward to the next conversation. If you'd like to learn more about Texas agricultural land, explore our work, or suggest topics for future episodes, feel free to reach out on our social media or email us at info@txaglandtrust.org. Have a blessed one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Beyond the Fence Line is brought to you by the Texas Agricultural Land Trust, dedicated to conserving the Texas heritage of agricultural lands, wildlife habitats, and natural resources. Find out more at txaglandtrust.org.